Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the double ALS section on technology, law, and legal education summer webinar series. I'm Drew Simshaw. I'm the chair of this year's summer webinar committee for the section, and I'm joined on the committee by Mason Clark from Stetson, Daniel Copes from Memphis, Kirsten Davis from Stetson, and Elizabeth Farrell Clifford from Florida State. Today's presentation is the first in a series of weekly webinars we'll be holding addressing technology, law, and legal education that will run through the end of July. You can visit our section webpage at the AALS website for more information and registration for future webinars. Our next webinar, same day, same time next week, will feature Michelle Rodenberg from the University of North Carolina, who will present on practical uses of GenAI for lawyers and legal professionals beyond research and drafting tools. A registration link for that presentation will be circulated soon. Sessions for this series have been scheduled through the end of June, but we're still accepting proposals for the month of July. And if you haven't received the link to the online proposal form through various outlets, you can contact me at simshaw@gonzaga.edu. Today's webinar is titled Demystifying Generative AI for Legal Educators, a great way to start off our series. We're extremely excited to welcome today's presenters, Susan Tanner and Tracy Norton. Dr. Susan Tanner is an assistant professor of law at the University of Louisville Brandeis School of Law. And you can find her bio on the webinar website and see how her experience, including a PhD in rhetoric from Carnegie Mellon, and her work at the intersection of artificial intelligence, linguistics, and law has really established her as an international authority on generative AI in legal practice. And Tracy Norton holds the Eric Vincent Anderson Professorship and is an assistant professor of law at the LSU Paul M. Herbert Law Center. Again, her full bio is on the webinar website and reflects her blend of innovative teaching and scholarly excellence and visionary leadership in the integration of technology and neuroscience into legal education. So please feel free to enter your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and our presenters will address them as best they can. So with that, I'm pleased to hand things over to today's presenters, Susan Tanner and Tracy Norton.
Good morning. Thank you so much for such a lovely introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. A little bit of patience with me as I get my slides up. I'm excited. Tracy and I are both excited to be sort of starting everything off. And I'm hoping this will be a good introduction. We've planned this for a variety of knowledge bases, right? Folks who have been playing around with generative AI and folks who are brand new to it. This first part, as Drew said, is going to build on what I used to do with corpus and computational linguistics when I was at Carnegie Mellon, and just talk a little bit about some of the back-end processes. And then Tracy will take it over and walk you through some much more practical applications. So I'm going to apologize first. My part is going to be a little bit of wonky. Tracy's going to interrupt me with questions and comments. But please, if anything I say is just inscrutable, stop me, have me slow down and explain something. We're going to try and get through a lot of content in 45 minutes with some time left over for questions. Tracy, is there anything that you wanted to say to start us off?
No, actually, Drew covered it with the introduction, and yeah.
Okay, so we're going to cover four parts. I'm going to start with an introduction of what is AI, talk a little bit more specifically about generative AI and a little bit of the background about how it works. And then Tracy will give you an introduction to a tool that we've developed, the law professor Sandbox, and talk to you a little bit about how to make generative AI work through prompting and some other resources. So my part is going to start with a bit of a background about AI, machine learning, and generative AI, and how these terms are all related to each other. So I'm going to start off with the closest I can get to as a definition of AI, which is that it's a field of study that enables machines to simulate human intelligence and perform tasks that typically require human cognition. And so we notice that that is a definition based on what it's able to do, not how it's doing it. And so there's no one software that's considered AI. There's no one process that's considered AI. And so it's a very fuzzy definition. But in general, one of the things that we've come to think about about for modern AI processes is that at least part of the time it is going to be learning from data without explicit programming, either through supervised or unsupervised machine learning. And this is the architecture that powers a wide range of applications, right? So at one point or another, everything from Microsoft Word to spam filters have all been considered to incorporate AI, not necessarily generative AI. But here's the problem. As I mentioned, there's not a great sort of universally understood definition of AI or what counts as AI, because pretty much as soon as a computer is able to do something and we incorporate it enough to where it becomes routine, we say that it's no longer AI. So the first time we really started using AI very broadly was from IBM's Deep Blue, which could beat a grandmaster at chess. And now that seems so routine that we all have a more sophisticated chess program in our phones. And so we don't really think of that AI, not because the technology's change is actually better than it used to be, but because that process seems so routine that we don't think of it as really exciting. And so there are Gustafson, Goldberg, and Gustafson say that AI means almost implemented. In other words, as soon as we implement something, we no longer call it AI. But
So,
yeah.
Susan, let me ask you a question. So I'm on the university's AI committee, and we are developing policies for different levels of AI use. So what are we going to use as a definition of AI?
So unfortunately, there's no great definition, and especially by the time a whole committee agrees on a definition, it will be outdated, right? Other than something that's capable of performing human tasks. And again, what we think of as being distinctly human changes, because once a computer can do it, we figure that's just something that a computer can do. So one of the things I warn, I'm also on my university's AI committee, and one of the things I've warned folks about from the start is to be very careful when you're specifying the types of programs that you want to talk about. I've seen some early policies that say students can't use AI, which in today's day means pretty much students can't turn on their computers, right? Because some process at some point is going to involve something that someone's going to call AI, right? Whether it's sending an email, running spell check in Word, but at some point or another, one of those processes will have been considered AI. So at the very least, talk more about generative AI. That might also be a little bit overbroad at times, but that's why hopefully a little bit of this will make sense coming soon. But I wanted to also say that AI seems really sort of new age and fancy, especially because it's been in the news for recently, but it's old. When I started at Oric, when I had recently graduated from law school, I was on a team that used AI for everything from legal research to doc review to contract analysis, and specifically for predictive analytics. So we've been using something that at some point we've been calling AI since at least 2013. It's just that the programs have gotten bigger and better and faster. And so it's sort of warped in the past about 3 years. But
so it sounds like if I don't understand predictive analytics, for example, I'm already behind. Is that right?
no, so the great news, and this is part of why the news has been making such a big deal about generative AI, is because it's much more user-friendly, that it does a lot of the work behind the scenes. You don't really know what it's doing, right? When I was doing predictive analytics, I had to know a lot about network analysis. I had to actually individually go in and code, right? So much of my early work, either in at Oric or when I was in my PhD program, involved working in Python and R and doing statistical analysis. But these sorts of things can actually be deployed much easier by people without expertise. And especially when we're talking about things like ChatGPT, right? That we don't need as much specialized knowledge, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't understand the basic processes that are behind these programs. And so when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're again, as I've mentioned, we're often talking about generative AI, even if we don't put the generative in front of it, but there are other types of AI that are still very important, like discriminative AI, which is predictive or make something that makes classifications, right? Or extractive, which is the AI that is behind things like Google, and anything that will help either search or summarize. I worked with someone who created a program called On Topic, which would just tell you what the topic of every paragraph was about, right? And again, this was in 2009. So it's been a while that these sorts of things have been around. And then again, most of the time when we're talking about AI now, we're talking about generative, which means that it's content creating. So in other words, instead of just telling you something that you've programmed it to do, it gives you new content. And that's what's behind things like LLMs. And so ChatGPT has within it LLM functionality, image diffusion functionality, voice recognition, and also coding. So one program might have multiple different types of generative AI, but also as it's becoming more sophisticated, it's also incorporating more things like extractive. So it'll actually point you to real resources that exist in the real world. And so it's not even just generative, it's also built on these other forms of AI. And so when we think about discriminative AI, we're really talking often about machine learning. Extractive is typically more algorithmic, more rule-based. And then generative AI is built on advanced neural networks. And so one of the things that's really important to remember is that the magic behind GenAI is not from what we could traditionally consider computer programming, right? So you're not going to pull up something like Python or Java and then tell the computer what you want to find. And the great thing about this is that we go from this sort of classical rule-based software, right, where I give the computer explicit instructions, if X, do Y. So that is great when I know what I want the answer to be. So this is why we still use calculators. We don't just plug all numbers into generative AI, because when we already know what the answer should be, computers are great at running a very simple program to tell you what that answer is. It becomes more complicated when we throw in machine learning. So there's still going to be code involved, but much of the logic lives in the data. This is part of why we call it machine learning, not because the machine is necessarily learning, but because the machine is doing something that we didn't explicitly tell it to do. It is running analysis on the data, and then giving us its recommendations of how to interpret that data. And so that's traditional machine learning. That's the same sort of thing that any computational linguistic would have been working with. And then we amplify that. We sort of take it up to a couple of more notches when we throw in these deep neural networks.
Susan,
Yes.
Susan. It sounds like I need a course in machine learning, or like I should be doing something to develop my expertise in these areas. What should I do?
So I think if you wanted to be an expert in generative AI, absolutely, right? You could take a machine learning class, but if you want to be able to ethically use it, I would argue all you need is this basic introduction into what's going on behind the scenes to know what its capabilities and limitations are. And hopefully we're going to be able to get through that in this 45 minutes. But the key thing to remember is that for each of these, there's some part when we're talking about neural networks that no matter how expert you are, if you are an engineer for OpenAI, there's a certain part where the computer's doing something that you can't fully explain what's happening between those steps. So no matter how expert you are, there's still going to be a black box. And I wanted to sort of explain what I mean about machine learning. What do I mean that it's not explicitly trained? These are two statistical models that I worked with a lot. They're helpful for understanding language. One is k-means and one is k-nearest neighbor. And so this is so all I would do is throw in, I'd clean up some text. I'd have a program, a statistical software program like Minitab, evaluate huge data sets of text, and then I would use different heuristics to understand what's going on in those vast amounts of data. And so this represents what potentially two different statistical models would do with the exact same data. In other words, one of the things that's happening is with one set of data, there's different ways to interpret it. And so that's one of those ways that machine learning will tell us something that we didn't know we needed to know about the data. And I'm going to sort of pause and show one more wonky little graphic here, which is, and again, I want to sort of emphasize, I don't think everyone needs to know all of this to be able to use generative AI, but I do think understanding the basics of, for example, machine learning are helpful for understanding why things like generative AI will necessarily hallucinate, why they'll tell you things that aren't true, and what this means for the data that we're inputting. And so one of the things I want to sort of make clear is that generally, training data and reinforcement data are separate. And this is important for our understanding because the training data happened before they released the first GPT. I mean, they update it every so often, but that training data, it stops at a certain time, right? There's a misconception that models like ChatGPT are learning from our inputs in the same way that they learned from machine data, and those are usually very separate processes. And so we need to understand that when we run a prompt, it's more like running a run command from our computer, right? And a little bit like reinforcement, right? So sometimes it'll ask you which is better. And so this is what we call reinforcement learning. And it says, okay, you're doing it well. And that will go to train the model, but it's not sort of instantaneous. Unless ChatGPT specifically scrapes our prompt, our chats, it's not going to throw that language into the training model. That training data has already been established. But again, one of the things I want to be really clear about is no matter what, there are always going to be multiple hidden layers. So no one can make a guarantee. And this is sort of a separate issue from how it's using our information, but we should be very careful about what information we input into programs like ChatGPT, just like we should be very careful with any information we input into Google or email each other, right? Sensitive client information, FERPA protected data we might be careful with. And there's some guidance that says disclosure, even with no risk of harm, might still be a problem.
Susan, it sounds like it sounds like under the model rules of professionalism from the ABA, I have more latitude in what I say in a crowded restaurant about my clients than I would under their guidance on what I input to ChatGPT.
I think that's right. And I think that's probably because we understand better how someone will use what you say in a crowded restaurant than the folks who are writing the model rules understand about how our data is being used. And so I think that there is caution. I will also point us to some other ethical guidance that I think actually does a really good job where some folks actually worked with machine learning experts to understand the process behind it. And the one I like to talk about is the Kentucky rules, the Kentucky guidance that's recently come out. And so I just want us to remember that there's certain dangers whenever we interact with anything that's connected to the internet, but partially we're being overly cautious because we are an overly cautious group of folks. But this also points us to the fact that, as I've mentioned, there's always a few steps that not even the engineers behind ChatGPT can explain. But there is a lot that we understand, right? Because large language models are as much humanities as they are computer science. Whenever we're working on something with a large corporate, whenever we were doing natural language processing, it was always a team of people, some machine learning experts, some AI experts, and some linguists who were working together to sort of understand what's going on with that language. And so things like LLMs are built on computational linguistics and natural language processing. And so this is bear with me. It's gonna get a little bit wonky, but this is sort of my joy, because this is what I worked for a little bit more than 7 years on my dissertation for. And so in short, you might have heard that LLMs are stochastic parrots, which just means that they parrot what we give them based on some sort of statistical algorithm. In other words, they sort of figure out what's going on with our language, and then they parrot it back to us in a particular way. And we do know some of these back end processes behind LLMs, right? So we know that, for example, encoders help model the group words into categories. And this is all done through linguistics, right? King, queen, princess, or prince equals royalty. And then they decode it, and the decoders help the model predict what words will come next. So for example, Tracy, if I were to say, royalty, like King Charles sits on what would be the natural fill in the blank there?
Throne.
Excellent. And linguistically, that is the correct answer, right? Because we know that the word, that the word king is associated with the word throne. But Tracy, if you had to sort of think, how often on a day-to-day basis do you think King Charles actually sits on a throne?
I'm guessing not very much. I would think he usually just sits on a regular old chair.
I mean, I would say the same thing. So my assumption would be that more often than not, he's sitting on a regular chair. So in reality, right, there was the sort of appropriate response might have been chair. But that's not linguistically the right answer, right? Because we know that the word king has a very special relationship to the word throne, and king does not have that same relationship to the word chair, even though in all likelihood, a king actually does sit on a chair much more often than he sits on a throne, right? And this is how LLMs work. They don't know what's going on in the real world. They just know what the language would predict.
So if I want to get accurate answers about what King Charles sits on, would it be better if I restricted the LLM to only consider data from, let's say, his daily diaries or photographs taken of him throughout the day?
So the good news about that is, if we were working with sort of more traditional forms of AI, like extractive AI, absolutely, you'd have more accurate information if you limited the data set. But as you can imagine, right, from those pictures of how machine learning works with those vast nodes and modules, a lot of LLMs actually work better when we give it even more information. So we wouldn't necessarily want to restrict any LLM to just a limited subset of data. The model will get better. And again, because it's still generating, there's no guarantee that it will generate based on that limited set of data that you've had. This is part of why some folks are still frustrated with some LLMs, because they want the information to be accurate. And the only way to make sure that it's accurate is to use a different type of AI, right? Not generative, because generative will still be generating. But one of the reasons, right? So I'm careful to point out that under some definitions, things like, autocomplete in your phones would be generative AI, because it's generating something new. But those are pretty limited and not very threatening. One of the reasons that LLMs are so great is because they understand context a lot more, right? And so Tracy, in this meeting, if I were to say attention is, how would you respond?
Attention is, there's an article with that title.
Yes. Right. So probably you would respond in this one, attention is all you need, right? So it was an article that was created by a group of Google engineers in 2017 that really sort of propelled machine learning and generative AI forward, and working on within that deep neural networks. And it's been cited by over 180,000 articles by this point. So in context, that makes sense. But if I had asked you in a different context, you might have given me a different answer, something like the purest form of generosity, the beginning of devotion, or expensive to pay. And these are all perfectly legitimate ways to finish that sentence. But one of the reasons that generative AI is so much more useful now is it understands context in a way that previous text completers did not understand context. Um, and and we know a little bit about how the LLMs are trained. So we know that it's trained on language, and trained in the first instance on language having nothing to do with actual definitions. So it's not that we gave we gave computers dictionaries and said, memorize the meaning of all of these words. We actually learned what these words mean by their context, much like people actually learn more often through context than through memorizing the dictionary. And the way that it just parses out sentences into discrete quantities, right? So this is what we're going to call tokens in most cases. And so it'll look at how sentence can be parsed out, different varieties of combining words. So for example, with n-grams, an n of 1 or a unigram would be this is a sentence, and n of 2 would be this is a sentence, and an n of 3 would be this is a sentence, and it's just combining words in a particular way. If you look at the concordance table, this is a similar thing, but in this case, it's looking at just what words do we normally see around the word process. And so it's going to tell us when I see the word process, what kinds of words generally follow that. And so this is just the very basics of how the LLMs are trained, knowing that it doesn't understand the meaning at the start, but then there's a whole bunch of other processes that happen, right? So we have to create the corpus. We have to use our NLP tools to understand how to break everything up. Then we throw it into, we sort of ask the machine to tell us a little bit about that data, to split it up in particular ways. And then we process it and pre-process it, right? And on and on and on, right? But most of at no point do we ask our computers to wander around the world and tell us anything true about what happens outside of language. So this all is happening within an understanding of language and how language is related to each other. And so this is why I like to say, hallucinations are a feature and not a bug in generative AI. But we always have to be sort of vigilant about it, right? So at best, I think asking generative AI is like asking your Aunt Betty for research. I have an Aunt Betty. She's really smart. She was a teacher for most of her life. She's often right. And so in the same way, generative AI and LLMs are not necessarily going to be wrong, but they won't be a trustworthy source of their own, right? So this is why citation is a little bit problematic when it comes to LLMs. And it will probably get the common knowledge parts right. And this is because of how it's trained, right? So the more often it sees something, the more often it's going to be able to connect particular words together, right? So it gets the common knowledge parts right, not because it knows that is true about the world, but because it has seen certain words together often enough to where it can put them together in a comprehensible way. But at worst, it's going to be like asking your 4-year-old nephew for an answer to something. It will try to please you. And if it doesn't know the answer, it will make one up. And the problem is it's going to do these all at the same time. It's going to give you some things that are correct and some things that are false. And it lulls us into this sort of false sense of security, right? So I think this is where lawyers often get themselves into trouble by submitting poor briefs, right? There are some that just makes up everything from start to finish, right? I can't excuse that. But I understand the humanity of thinking, okay, it was right. I looked up the first 10 citations and it was right about those first 10 citations. Maybe I can be a little bit lazy about looking up the rest, but there's no reason to think that it's not going to get that 11th one wrong, right? There's nothing about the system. Oh, I see that Marlena has a question. Okay. We'll ask it later. I was to say, I think you're on mute, but no, it's fine. We'll ask it later. I just happened to see your hand up. So this is sort of before I turn it over to Tracy, I just wanted to say this is what I think of as the most important things that anyone needs to know about sort of how generative AI, how AI works, the architecture on which they're built, and sort of the indeterminacy of the answers that it's going to give you. As I sort of stop my screen share and let Tracy share her screen so she can talk about the generative AI sandbox and sort of how to use it, do we have any questions that I should answer? Feel free to pop up your hand, ask them in the, oh, I see something in the chat. goodness, sorry. Have I really gone to it? I'm so sorry. I start talking and it's a half an hour. And I also wanted to say we are happy to take questions at the end too. We know that this is supposed to be a 45-minute talk. We'll probably bump up right against that 45 minutes, but we'll stay and answer questions afterwards as well.
Okay, you should see my screen. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, here we go. So, we understand that all of that is and can be very daunting. And so Susan and I got together with a colleague, Will Monroe, and we've recently brought in another colleague, Amy Pittman, to put together the Law Prof's GenAI Sandbox to really encourage law professors to dip a toe into generative AI. We want to encourage curiosity and we want to encourage people to play with it and to use it. And even if you're like stridently anti-AI, it would help to know what it is and what it does and what it can and can't do for you. So that at least as you're making those arguments against the AI, you're making them grounded in the reality of what it does. So we created the Law Prof's GenAI Sandbox, and I'm going to walk you through a little bit of that. But first, I wanted to, give you a little bit of comfort that lawyers and law professors are already trained in critical thinking, strategic planning, and the nuances of language. And that's really what you need to be able to use generative AI effectively. While it is sort of a creature of programmers, it is really, as Susan has explained, a linguistic tool. And so the more you are steeped in the uses of language, the better you're going to be able to use this. And so you don't need any additional expertise to get started with generative AI. You do need some expertise, but you already have it. So what I hope you'll do at the conclusion of our presentation is join us in the sandbox. We encourage you to start wherever you like, use whatever appeals to you, suggest resources to us that you'd like to see, and then share what you have developed with the community. We're working on adding some things to the website so that people can share their own work without having to go through us. Right now, you have to go through us, but we're happy to add things. It is currently hosted at sites.google.com/view/LWAI. We are in the process of porting it over to our domain name, lawprofsaisandbox.com and .org. And so, but if you've got the Google Sites link, that will always get you to it, or it should always get you to it. So that's where it is right now. And so I'm going to give you a quick tour of it. I'm going to show you just a couple of quick things.
And I do want to say, so we've been just like Tracy said, we want to think about it as a sandbox, right? It's not necessarily the end all be all, but hopefully a place where people can experiment. And I really want to encourage everyone to share resources with us because we've tried to put a couple of great resources out there for folks, but we certainly everyone else is using generative AI in ways that we can't even imagine right now. And every time someone sends me a resource, I'm like, I'm so glad that you sent this to me because I wanted to see this myself. So we're happy to post things.
Yeah, we want it to be a place where, like a sandbox, everybody can come to play. Everybody can bring what they have and come to play. This is very much an evolving resource. Just since we released it a few months ago, we've added a lot more. So we recommend that folks start with Discover Your AI Persona. We have a quiz here that you can take and it'll give you a score. And that score will give you your AI persona. And then once you have your AI persona, you can then, hold on just a second, I'm getting more up here than I want. Sorry, my Zoom controls are in the way. Once you've got your persona, then you can go into whichever persona that you had, and it will give you some resources based on whether you're just starting out or whether you're developing your own resources. And so these are the different areas that we have. One that I'll show you, because we've got a tutorial that is broken down by persona, is one for creating hypotheticals. We have several more hypotheticals, not hypotheticals, tutorials that are coming over the next several months, especially as we're able to do more on this over the summer. But for the creating hypothetical one, you'll see that there's a tutorial for each level. And so click here. So for example, for the Explorer tutorial, that's sort of the beginning one. And you can view the tutorial here, or you can copy this into your own Google account. And this walks you through preparing a rule synthesis exercise based on existing exercises that you have. And then as you go to each different level of AI user, you get fewer scaffolding tools to help you build out your hypothetical. And you go into things like learning how to prompt for a hypothetical. So these are some of the resources that we have. Yep, good. Okay, just making sure I had it in the right place. The resources that we have. And so we invite everybody to just look around, see what you're interested in. And if there's anything that you would like us to add or that you have to add, feel free to reach out to us and submit a Sandbox suggestion. I want to share with you quickly a little bit of what our next series of tutorials is going to look like. And so next month, we'll be loading some prompt architecture tutorials. I prefer prompt architecture to prompt engineering because there's more art to this than I think we've been led to believe. Susan and I use the rhetorical situation as the basic canvas for our prompts. And the rhetorical situation is also something that we teach our students in first year and upper level legal writing courses as a way to think about how you plan your writing. And so we've taken the idea of the rhetorical situation, the 6 different components, and from that, we've created a prompting canvas called the rhetorical situation canvas. And so you can do a quick and dirty prompt using this canvas where you just put in, a value for each one of these things. And I'll show you in a second a prompt that uses each one of these as a field. But a more nuanced way to do this, and this is where the art comes in, is to insert a module into each space on the canvas. And you can draft those modules yourself just using a pen and a sheet of paper, or you can let AI help you. And so let me show you kind of how that works. So for example, for the author module, oh, sorry, I forgot I had this here. This is like a quick and dirty. Acting as an experienced LSU law professor, draft a letter.
I don't know if you're sharing, Tracy, I don't know if you're sharing your screen with us right now.
Oh, hold on.
Sorry. I also want to say, while she's loading that, just as Tracy's mentioned before, and just as I've mentioned, right, if we think of generative AI as a writing tool, I think it makes anyone who reads and writes regularly more of an expert. This is part of why you'll hear folks like Ethan Mollick and folks around the country saying we need more humanities majors, right? I remember when I was finishing up my PhD getting recruited by Google, right? Because Google's always hiring humanities majors to help them because so much of this is really just based on writing.
Susan and I also are finishing up an article called Mobius Strip, where we talk about teaching the rhetorical situation as a way of prompting and teaching prompting as a way of teaching the rhetorical situation, because there is that link between the humanities and using LLMs. Okay. So this is what a quick and dirty prompt would look like, where you put in each part of the rhetorical situation: subject, the exigence, the purpose. But you can get even better results. The results are directly related to your ability to prompt it, because like Susan said, the linguistic answers are not always the answers that you want, and you're going to get more specific answers, more tailored to what you want, the more information you give, and this gives you a framework for providing a lot of very detailed information. So this is what a comprehensive rhetorical situation canvas would look like, where you have a module for each one of these items. And so you can develop the module by adding whatever variables you want. So for author, I might want all of this information: demographics, professional background, what motivates you, what inspires you, where do you get your information, what triggers you to make decisions, and how do you measure success or satisfaction. That would be my author module. I can use a GPT to develop that for me. So before I have my prompt even, I can have sort of a pre-prompt. Please fill in the fields for each variable using the attached biography. So this is my prompt module for audience. I fed it my bio from the LSU website, and now it's giving me back my completed prompt module. So, I mean, my completed author module. It says audience, but it should say author. This is my author module now. And so now I can take this module, I can develop the other modules the same way. And then I stack the modules in the prompt. And then I finish it with a building instruction that looks exactly like this. I don't input anything in that bracketed author. It pulls that from the prompt stack where I've got the module filled out above, and then it will give me a result. After you begin using these and find what works for you effectively, then you can start building a library of prompt stacks for each of those modules. And so, for example, I have mine in Notion. And so I have prompt stacks for law profs, law school administrators, 1L students. And I even have prompt stacks for specific administrators. I have one for my dean. I have one for my associate dean of faculty development. I've got one for the associate dean of operations. And so I have different really well-developed modules that I can put into stacks and use as prompts, so that I'm constantly building and refining a library, because I write the same kinds of things over and over again. And so, like I said, I use Notion, but you could use Excel, you can use a Word doc, you can use, whatever you want to keep track of these. And this is a more systematic way of getting really nice, refined prompts without having to put together a prompt on the fly every time you want to do something.
And Tracy, I'm going to interrupt you very quickly, just to say that I think sometimes when I hear folks say that they've tried generative AI and it didn't work, right? I think it's because sometimes they forget, they almost think that the program should be reading their mind to figure out what it needs to know, right?
Right.
But I just like when my students, when they first come to me, they don't understand how to write a letter, an email to their professor, right? Because they've never done that before. They don't know anything about the audience. And so we have to be very specific about understanding all of these key components that go into writing. So I think sometimes if you've tried generative AI and it's been frustrating, I love using Tracy's architecture to figure that out. And then also remembering that you can also ask ChatGPT questions to have it help you along as well if it becomes too overwhelming. Like, what else do you
Absolutely.
need to know from me, right?
And hopefully, yes, I ask that a lot. What else do you need to know? And it gives great questions that you fill stuff in. You can see when you just look at the stack without anything filled in, this requires expertise to complete. Like anybody can put any kind of prompt in. That doesn't mean they're going to get good results. And so your expertise is needed in writing a good prompt and in teaching students to write a good prompt. One question that I've gotten from students is, well, do we even need to know how to write anymore because ChatGPT is going to do it all for us? And I tell them, yeah, you have to know a lot about writing to be able to get good writing out of ChatGPT. And then I'm going to leave everybody with one final question. When people say that, oh, this is going to, it's discouraging to me that so many people are using Chat GPT or Claude or whatever for so many things. And I understand why we're using it so much. I use it quite a bit. And my big question to everybody these days and I'm working on an article on, I keep losing the phrase. It's basically professional identity development for students is, why do we have so much to write that requires so little of us? And we need to think more about asking ourselves and our students to write things that are meaningful instead of writing things that can be satisfied with a super crappy prompt.
All right, so we're going to stay after for any questions, and it looks like we have a couple. So first of all, Drew, I think you said that you're going to be publishing the video, and we're happy to share the slides as well. And if I'm happy to distribute, I'm happy to distribute my slides broadly, but also just email me, and I'll send you a copy of my slides as well. And then, how do AI tools use user prompts to train their tools? Oh, they don't generally, right? So I'm just going to say that right now, is that's one of the things that we should hopefully know, is that prompting is not the same as training data. So unless unless they go through and make that a separate step, right, it would not become part of the training data. How all of the generative AI companies have said they're using prompt information, if they use it at all, is to help their engineers understand whether things are working or not, right? So it's more like reinforcement information data, right? So it is not the same as training data. It's really to sort of make revision. So I like to sort of say, if we imagined that generative AI was a doctor, I go to the doctor has read a whole bunch of medical books, went to a whole bunch of school. That all happens before I sit in his office. Then I leave his office and I write a review about whether or not I liked my experience, and I post that review. But that doesn't change what goes into the textbooks, right? It doesn't it doesn't change how doctors learn their craft. It just tells the doctor whether or not I liked that experience. So that's how we can sort of think about reinforcement data. So I'll tell you, a lot of my scholarship is in privacy law. So there's part of me that says, sometimes you're going to hear me say that I'm not afraid of this part, but I am afraid of this part. So I'm never very, very sort of trusting with any of my information, if that makes sense. So I think there's always a reason to not trust whatever company it is, or big law, right? So I agree.
This question about, that it helps learn things about us and goes into memory of what our voice is. We have a lot of control over that. Mm-hmm. There are settings in all of the GPTs that I've been using. There are settings where you can decide, do I want a more bespoke experience or do I not want a more bespoke experience? The same way that when I'm on social media, I can choose, do I want targeted ads or do I not want targeted ads? And so it depends. If you want the more specific experience, you're going to have to give something up for that. If you don't want them to have your data, just know that you're going to get a more generic experience, which may be fine with you.
And I will say too, that's where I would use, we have access to things like Lexis Plus AI that have assured users that they are being very careful with all of our data. I don't think there's a Lexis rep on this call. So I will say, so as I said, I think of generative AI as a writing tool, not a research tool. So I don't ever go to Lexis Plus AI to help me write an email to someone, right? That's not the place I go. And then I still use old-timey natural language searches in Lexis. I find them to be better and more comprehensive, and I have more control over them than I do generative AI. I don't actually use the generative AI searches as often. Although
I don't even use natural language searches. I use Boolean searches because that's the only way. Because natural language searches I think are garbage, but that's just me. But Boolean searches are the only way I can get any control over my research results. The less I'm thinking, the less I'm thinking.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other, like I said, we're happy to answer questions, but we know that we've taken up 51 minutes of your time, and you had a lot of patience to get through a lot of wonky information. So I really appreciate your patience with us.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Tracy. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, please do feel free to reach out to either one of us. We're either one or both of us are happy to talk about this as much as you want.
Well, yeah, thank you, Susan, and thank you, Tracy. I think this is a great way to start off our series. Thank you to all of our attendees, and please be on the lookout for information about future webinars this summer. Wishing everyone a great rest of their day.